The car that I've been driving this week is perhaps one of the least understood vehicles sold in America. It's the 2017 BMW i3 with the range extender. The i3 is sold in two different forms. We have the battery electric i3, which is electric only. There is no gasoline tank, there's no gasoline engine. You plug it into the wall, it charges up, and you drive electric only. And then we have the i3 range extender, which is sort of a hybrid. But the i3 is not like any other hybrid sold in America. It is a very specific kind of hybrid. The classification that most people refer to is the BEVx classification that was created by California. And that means that we must first talk about California's zero emissions or ZEV mandate, because the ZEV mandate in California is really one of the reasons that the i3 with the range extender exists in the first place. California has decided, for better or for worse, that 25% of new vehicles will be zero-emissions vehicles by 2025. Now that may sound straightforward, but nothing cooked up by the government and lobbyists is ever as straightforward as it seems. Rather than an actual percentage of cars being sold that actually produce zero emissions, like pure battery electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, the California Air Resources Board created a credit system where an alphabet soup of classifications, PZEV, AT-PZEV, TZEV, etc., all get partial credits. Then we have traditional hybrid vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles like the Chevy Volt or the Toyota Prius Prime that also get credits for the ZEV mandate. Into this complicated world came an all-new classification, the BEVx classification. Despite having a gasoline engine, BEVx's get exactly the same credits that a regular zero-emissions vehicle would get. And that is very critical to understand exactly why the i3 behaves the way that it does in the United States. Because if you have a vehicle that has a large battery and it also has a gasoline engine under the hood, but it meets those BEVx requirements, then you get the same 2.5 ZEV credits for every BEVx that you sell. And at this point in time, half of the BMW i3s sold include the gasoline engine. As you might expect, this helps manufacturers get to that 25% without actually selling 25%. In order to be the unicorn that burns gasoline but still gets the maximum ZEV credit, very specific requirements have to be met. And at this point in time, the i3 with the range extender is the only BEVx on sale in California. The vehicle must have an all-electric range of at least 75 miles. That means the i3, either before or after the 2017 update, definitely qualifies. The auxiliary power unit, which is the gasoline engine, must provide a range that is less than or at most equal to the electric range. That means that you cannot have a battery that gives you 100 miles of range and a gasoline engine and gasoline tank that give you 150 miles of range. You can either give it 100 miles of range or less. The next point is the key difference between the i3 and something like a Chevy Volt or a Prius Prime. The APU may not turn on until the battery has reached 6.5% or less. And once switched on, the APU may not charge the battery more than 6.5%. This means the i3 with the range extender in the United States may not have a battery hold mode or a mountain mode or whatever you want to call it that helps you increase the battery state of charge or hold the battery state of charge at a higher level than 6.5%. That's quite different than the i3 with the range extender in Europe, which does have a hold mode. The other regulations and limitations dealing with BEVx's all have to do with emissions, because quite logically you would want a vehicle like this to be as clean as possible, so they have to meet the latest emission standards. Now let's go back to the BMW i3. Again, the i3 is an electric vehicle. It has a 170 horsepower electric motor in the back, and for 2017 it has a 33 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. When creating the i3 with the range extender, BMW did not swap out the electric motor or anything in the drivetrain for anything different. All they did was take a 0.6-liter two-cylinder engine from a C600 scooter, stick it to a generator, and jam it underneath the rear cargo compartment. I'm sure some of you out there have seen memes where they have a little electric vehicle and it's towing a trailer and the trailer has a generator on it and that's plugged into the car. That's exactly what's going on with the i3 range extender. And that's important to understand, because what we have here is a 34 horsepower two-cylinder engine. You notice the discrepancy here. The electric motor can give you 170 horsepower, the gasoline engine can give you 34 horsepower, and that's the key to understand how the REX works. 34 horsepower may not sound like much, but it is enough to allow the i3 to go 75 or 80 miles an hour as long as you're on level pavement without really changing the battery's charge. If, however, you start hill climbing, that's when the battery will start dropping below that 6.5% state of charge. It's perhaps easiest to think of hybrid vehicle systems in water terms. So imagine that we have a large water tank, that's the battery, and then we have a faucet going into the water tank, that's the input from the engine. And then we have a large faucet that draws off the water tank, that's the electric motor that powers the vehicle forward. You can start seeing the problem here. If you draw more than that 34 gallons a minute out of the tank, there's going to be a point where the tank is completely empty and all you're getting is what that tap at the top is delivering. This is where the i3 is very different than something like a Chevy Volt or a Prius or any other hybrid in America. Most hybrids in America will experience about a 30% reduction in power when the battery is depleted and you're operating on the gasoline engine alone. That is definitely noticeable and it's possibly even annoying, but it's not the same kind of thing that we see in the i3, because the i3 will experience about an 80% drop in power. On the bright side, it is fairly difficult to do, and that surprised me a little bit. Because the last time we had an i3, I really wanted to get into that limp mode, and I was having a real hard time doing it. Going up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass where the speed limit is 50 miles an hour was not sufficient to bring that car to its knees. Instead, I had to take back roads up and over that same mountain pass and drive the i3 very, very hard, braking very rapidly so that way it wasn't able to regenerate much power into the battery, and then using all 170 horsepower whenever possible to finally get into that mode. And of course, when it did get into that mode, it started climbing the hill very, very slowly. With just 34 horsepower under the hood, the i3 with 2 people in it had difficulties getting over about 35 to 40 miles an hour. Wasn't really a problem on that road because, of course, the speed limit was a little bit lower than I was going. Now, what happens if you're doing something like trying to climb the Continental Divide or try and climb over the Sierra Nevada mountains in California? Well, you'll be cruising along at, say, 65, 70 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden it feels like someone is pushing your foot off the accelerator pedal. You don't just hit a brick wall like some people have claimed in their i3. I know because I've done it. And while you were once traveling 65 or 75 miles an hour, after about a mile or so, you're definitely going to be going slower. Whether or not you think that is horribly unsafe is a matter that I'm not going to touch. However, you will have plenty of time to pull over to the side of the road if you choose to do so. And if you do that and you pull over to the side of the road, the gasoline engine will continue to charge the battery until it hits 6.5% again, at which point you will have a little bit more travel at those higher highway speeds. So you would be able to pull back onto the road, go up to that maximum speed, same 0 to 60 acceleration time the i3 normally gets, and then find your way to an exit if you wanted to. If that sounds very different than a regular hybrid, you're right, and that's because although this is technically a hybrid drivetrain, again, it's not the same kind of hybrid. This really is an electric vehicle with a backup plan. And that backup plan actually makes more sense to me than you might think. Ponder this for a second. Adding the range extender to the BMW i3 and the 2.4-gallon gas tank adds about 275 pounds. However, the i3's lithium-ion battery pack weighs over 500 pounds. And if you wanted to double the electric range of the i3, you would have to more than double the battery. The reason for that, of course, is the more weight you add to the vehicle, the less efficient it's going to be. So instead of adding 600 or 700 pounds of additional battery pack to the vehicle, they simply add a 275-pound range extender unit. In terms of overall efficiency, this makes logical sense, because if you're buying a Chevy Bolt because you might need to go 250, 270 miles every now and then overall in your Bolt, but really your daily commute is, say, 60 or 70 miles, the i3 system is a little bit more logical. It's not necessarily greener, of course, because it is still burning gasoline, but it is more logical. The i3 with the range extender is capable of driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles. You would simply have to stop every about 100 miles or so and put 2.4 gallons into the tank each time. Hopefully this video has helped make sense of the range extending system that we find in the BMW i3. Be sure and stay tuned for the complete review on the i3 coming up in the next few weeks. In the meantime, find us over at facebook.com to see what we're driving this week, and you can always head over to patreon.com and hunt us down over there if you want to support this channel. I'll see you next week.